I may not get rich overnight, but I'm also not going to get poor overnight. And so because you've got other strategies helping you to find those riches, whatever quote unquote rich means to an individual.
Hello, my beautiful radiant women. Now, I am so excited for our next guest because we're going to be talking about finance. And before you run away, it's really, really important things for us to know how to not leave money on the table and how do we actually, what do we do with when we start making 6 or 7 figures. And with me, I have Eunicia. She's an accomplished wealth strategist with over 15 years of experience in the financial service industry. Now, she's owned her expertise by delivering significant financial improvements to the bottom line of Fortune 500 companies across multiple industries. Her passion is helping 6 to 7 figure individuals optimize their wealth creation efforts by empowering them to leverage wealth, creating strategies that go beyond the 401ks, RIAs, or if you're in Australia, super, or wherever you're listening to this. Another typical savings account in order to minimize taxes, maximize growth, and increase income in retirement. So the topic that we're going to be discussing is that what do we do with our money, and how do we how do we not get what's the right word, tricked into or going into something that we don't know what we are doing, or we don't have the full information, or we're not getting it from a trusty source, and then we usually realize when it's too late. Then it's too late to say anything about it because the money's gone. So I'm so happy that you are here. Why don't you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got to doing this work?
Absolutely, Vanya. Thank you so much for having me here. It's such a pleasure to be with you and your listeners. I started doing this work, really, it was because what we realized years and years ago, my husband and I, we realized that the financial services industry had not done justice by our financial empowerment and by our own financial house. And the reason it didn't is because at that point in time, even though we were in that high income, higher net worth category, a lot of the money that was coming in was also being spent on all sorts of different things. Lifestyle, one, very importantly, right? We didn't know what we didn't know back then, but also we were passionate about investing in different types of projects that sat outside of the financial services industry. And so when naturally we would speak with a financial advisor, because we did not have $500,000, $1 million, $5 million in our investable accounts, the guidance that we got was always exceptionally superficial. And it was always more of, sending us back to do our own homework, because I was working for a company where compliance from an investment perspective was a huge thing. And there was quite a bit of due diligence that needed to be done to make sure that I don't invest in the companies that I'm prohibited to invest in. And furthermore, we never got to understand the different options that we had at our disposal, because one person would tell us one thing, would sell us some sort of a financial product. Another person would want to put us into this fund. The bank wanted to do something else. And there was never that cohesiveness across how our money was actually being put to work for us. And so because of that, I decided to really understand why that was happening. And more importantly, what I ended up finding out was that individuals similarly to me, similarly to us, and higher 6 and 7 figure earners have and are trapped in this lack of awareness, lack of empowerment, and frankly, lack of knowledge. And so that's kind of what fueled my fire to say, I've done finance and I've helped Fortune 500 CEOs and CFOs for many, many years. It's time to figure out how do we have help the smaller guy, the smaller gal, the smaller businesses that are struggling because they're not able to pay the big bucks to get the attention that they need to ultimately optimize their wealth.
Yeah, I'm so with you there. I think because we certainly have, and I think a lot of people shy away from that investing, or because there is so much information and it isn't really and as you say, if you sort of, the more money you spend, of course, the more attention they give you, because it's a higher commission for them. And when it comes to us little folks, it can be really scary, because you can tell that they're not really invested in giving you, they're not really investing their time, they're not really investing their energy. They're just, you're there, I have half an hour, 15 minutes with you, let me just, whatever, let me just get through it, and then I have bigger fish to fry. And so
100%.
yeah,
So
so
true. So true.
I'm so glad to have connected with you, and that you're doing this work, so we can be, so especially women who are listening to this, we can be educated, and if we're not there yet, we at least have this idea in the back of our head. Okay, I've listened to someone that I can trust, and this is what she says, and maybe that's something that I need to look into. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I would say you said a word that's very, very important, especially for our listeners, especially the women, because it's the women that, frankly, a lot of the financial service experts are kind of leading out. Not because perhaps they're intentional about it, but historically, they did not speak with the women about the money. They did not have the women in there to say, here's what your portfolio looks like, and here are the different options that you can take. Here are the different things that historically maybe you didn't know about. Let's sit down so that you can understand how those may work in conjunction with everything else that you have. Because when you do that, a beautiful thing happens, and your money's actually going to grow more optimized, but also you're going to have more of that peace of mind. And because of that, we run into so many ladies, so many women that end up either in a crummy situation because maybe they're on their own and they did not get the guidance that they needed, or perhaps they are married and their significant other passes away and they are left with literally nothing, and either nothing, or they have no idea where to start. And so that's also equally as scary, because I'll be like somebody that I was talking to not long ago. He owns a professional services company, and I found out subsequent to us, we're talking together, that 98% of their clients are actually financial advisors. Now, I'm telling you this because it's important, I promise. Then he tells me, after we talk and he understands a little bit how we're very different than what the industry does, he said, Eunicia, I would love for my wife and I to schedule a meeting with you. He said, good friend of theirs passed away in his sleep last year, very suddenly. Nobody expected it. He was fairly young. He was in his early 50s. And because his wife was left with, she had no idea where to turn. She had no idea where the money was. She had no idea where the accounts were. She had no idea the strategies behind those accounts. And so his own wife, when that happened, and her seeing what her friend was going through, she said, I need you to pull out all of the money and put it in the bank. And he looked me square in the eye, even though it was over Zoom, and he said, I tell you what, Eunicia, I should not have multi-seven figures sitting in the bank. And I said to him, well, no, you shouldn't, but you're working with all those financial advisors. Surely there's somebody you can trust. And he said, unfortunately, not one of those people would I have touch my money.
Wow.
And that's coming from someone that's providing professional services to financial advisor and financial advisors and financial advisor companies. Isn't that scary? From the look from the outside in, or from the inside out, whichever way we want to talk about it. And so things like that are one of the big reasons why, especially women, end up in not as ideal of a situation when it comes to building and developing wealth and establishing that solid platform, because of how the industry historically has been designed.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously, everything that us women went through, as you said, historically, not having that power. And I think the corporations and the gentlemen behind those desks are yet to catch up with that. We're actually very capable of doing it, and we're very capable of earning that money, and that we should be taken as seriously as any other person that is sitting in front of that desk. So if we are starting out, and let's say, whether it's by choice or whether it's, circumstances brought us to this space where we need to start doing something. We need to figure out whether we are leaving money on the table and what do we do about it. So where do we start?
So it's in a couple of different areas, right? Because a lot of individuals will ask themselves the question of, am I leaving money on the table? They start from that. They know that they've done something for themselves in the past. They have probably a multitude of accounts in different places. And there are other individuals who will say, well, I'm making good money, but I'm having a hard time starting because there's not enough to be paying myself, to be setting aside. And what I would tell those individuals, even though they start from different places, one thing that's very, very important is for them to start realizing what is that relationship with money that they have? Now, when I say relationship with money, I am not a money quote unquote coach. I've been told, Eunicia, what you do is so far superior than, the financial coaches that get you to look back to figure out how you got messed up when you were a child. I think that does help it have its merit. But when it comes to the hardcore money, we need to understand what is it that we want that money to do. Because regardless of what may or may not have happened to us in the past, we are in a place where it's the today. And it's the money that's coming in or the money that's already there, and it's the future. And oftentimes people cannot look at the current and the future. And certainly the financial services industry is not incentivized to look at what's going to happen with your money, with my money when we retire or when we choose to no longer work for money. And so a big component of that, for example, is risk. And you and I talked just before the show about this. A lot of financial advisors will have the risk checklist to assess risk profiles. But I think in the way that I see it is far more than risk profiles, because when every time we start working with clients, one of the things that we want to understand is, in addition to how they see the money, meaning what is it that you want this money to do for yourself? Do you want it to be liquid? Do you want it to be just for retirement? Do you want it to service for paying down or helping the children with their college? What about from taxes? We'll talk about taxes later, right? Those are all things that we have to consider. So once we go through, in our case, there's a very detailed methodology that we walk every single one of our clients through, because it contains all of the pitfalls, all of the areas that historically we see are missing. Then we start talking about, okay, what is it that from a risk perspective we're looking at in terms of how the money grows? A lot of people will say, I'm okay assuming risk because I'm younger, or I'm okay assuming risk because I think the market's going to go up, or whatever their reasoning is. What we find, though, when we start asking the question from the angle of, okay, you've got this sum of money, what would happen to you, your family, your emotions if, say, 50, not 100%, let's not talk about losing it all, but what would happen if 50% of the money one day or over a short period of time was to just be gone? And the answer we get from most individuals is either something bad would happen, like I could not handle that emotionally, or hold on a second, I can't have all of the money going through that. But the funny and sad part is that all of those individuals, either if they're in a category of they could not bear the loss, or they could not bear the loss on all of their money, have in most cases their money invested in those same types of risky assets or risk class. And so when they realize that, oh my gosh, you mean I actually have options? Yes, you have options. But to understand those options, it goes far beyond just Google. It goes far beyond just let's figure out, how we do this on our own, because it's complex. There are different types of financial, non-financial investments that are treated differently from a tax perspective. That's the other big thing that a lot of individuals don't think about. They read books, for example, that will say, well, to grow the most amount of wealth, invest your money in retirement accounts that are locked down by the government until you are retirement age, or else you pay penalties and extra taxes. And you get to save on your taxes today. And what I tell folks is just about every single one of those books has innuendos in there, especially somewhere towards the middle or the end of the book. that will talk about, and if you get to the point where you're projecting your taxes to be da-di-da-di-da, then you can potentially evaluate converting that money in Roth money or non-taxable money down the road. So what we do is we look at what are those scenarios for the clients today? Because oftentimes when they start those conversions down the road, especially, for us here in the States, we're looking at the interest rates are high. We're looking at taxes are probably going to go significantly higher. Do we want to pay higher taxes down the road? Sure. The money is going to grow in a much bigger pool, but do we want to pay taxes if we have the option to do so on some of the seed versus the entire crop, especially if percentages go up in taxes? If percentages stayed the same, arguably we would net out. But if they go up, whether it's because we make more money or because the tax brackets go higher or because we are in a higher tax bracket or whatever the permutation on that, how do we want to look at that? And so those are kind of the three things that I tell clients all the time. And we actually, for us, we walk them through, because what we found is that if we don't walk through those kind of three categorizations at a minimum, there are others as well, then we end up, to the point you made earlier, we end up leaving a lot of money on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you've just covered there, in terms of, because it's certainly a point that I've never heard before in terms of those taxes, that it seems so, when you hear experts talk about it, and as you said, read it in books, it's so cut and dried, like, well, if we can defer the tax, then great, and it seems like you're getting a benefit out of it. But when you actually crunch the numbers and you do figure it out, it doesn't always make sense to do that. Of course, depends on your, what your long-term goal is and what your plan is, but really having all the figures and then understanding, and then you consciously and with full information picking, okay, well, for now, where I want to go is this, and this is my best option. And
100%.
Yeah, and speaking to someone, most people wouldn't actually sit down, and because I imagine that takes a lot of work, sit down and actually calculate everything to be able to give you all of these options. So that's why I love what you do with, you provide so much information that the person has most, if not everything, they need to actually make a educated decision. And this is why then we can all invest, we can everyone, even if you don't have which I certainly don't have the background or the knowledge or anything like that. I essentially don't need it, because if you have someone that you can trust who gives you all the information, that's brilliant.
I had a couple of years ago, we had a family, that husband and wife, that started working with us, and the husband had found out about me through one of our mutual friends. So he was a referral, and we were talking with him and his wife, and the wife said, I'm invested with all my money. I'm invested in real estate. I'm doing syndicates. I'm going to become wealthy independently of my husband. But wouldn't it be nice if we were to be able to at least maximize that wealth? Even if you're growing the money, that's wonderful. Let's optimize it on the tax side. So we started working together. And sure enough, we are in our second year of working together, and we continue to stay and collaborate in a consulting fashion. And I got a call from them not long ago saying that the syndicates she was part of, one of the biggest syndicates, had actually gone underwater because of poor management. And she said, Eunicia, I doubted when we first started working together, because I didn't want to hear anything else. I knew what I knew. I had these people in my ear, and now I'm having to raise funds to figure out if there's a way to help the syndicate come back online. And I'm looking at her and I said, you mean you're throwing good money after potential bad money? And she said, I'm sorry to say that, but it's a lot of money. She said, it's everything that I had is sitting there. And if I don't do something about it, it's for sure not going to come back at all. And so a lot of times what I find is that individuals are paralyzed by the decisions that either they have to make or they've made. But what we have come to understand is that if individuals, to your point from earlier, they understand what their options are, they then get to make decisions that puts them at peace. It's okay to be doing syndicates or whatever it is that people want to do. As a matter of fact, we're huge proponents for alternative ways to grow wealth. But when we take an approach that's holistic with our money, even if one of those investment portfolios or the investment itself ends up going under, we know that peace in our heart that we are super diversified, not just within some sort of a round circle, but truly diversified across many different types of asset classes. Now, those same individuals are in a position where even if adversity comes up, they can still sleep at night, they can still find the joy in their life, and they're not paralyzed by this, oh my God, look what just happened to me for months and years, and living with that regret because the other part of their portfolio is picking things up and it's helping them still get to the goal that they originally set out for themselves.
Wow. Yeah. And that was leading me into my next question in terms of the diversification. And because we touched on it before, but how important is it? Because we sometimes hear that you invest in one thing, it's higher risk but higher gain. So it's and then when you hear sometimes someone speak, it sounds like it's pulling you in. So I'd love to know your opinion in terms of diversification and how much should we diversify, I guess.
Well, that the answer really depends in terms of specific percentages, but and also the amount of money that we're talking about. But what I tell clients and individuals all the time is it's important for them to, when they understand their options, they're no longer acting from that scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
Because when those proposals are made and those individuals come up with those, I call them bright-eyed and bushy-tailed ideas, sometimes, not all the time, but it's just a funny way to say it's a great idea. We don't know if it's going to work, right? And so they come up with these ideas, and they, in many cases, if you sit and kind of look at the trends, it's individuals that are perhaps going to actually try to get more money into said investment, right? Mm-hmm. They're trying to raise funds. They want to increase the pie because if the pie increases, everybody else does better. And it's this higher risk, higher potential reward. And what I tell people is when you are truly diversified and you have assets that are protected from the volatility of the market, and you have assets that maybe are, I don't know, even in real estate, or you have assets that are invested in assets that are generating income, again, really depends on, from a client to another. Then what ends up happening is that extra money that you have available at your disposal, now you make a lot more of a calculated risk to say, you know what, I'm going to go in with X amount of money, and if I end up losing it, it's not going to be pretty, but I'm not going to lose sleep at night. Maybe I'll be upset for a day or two, but I won't lose sleep at night. But at the same time, if that amount of money doubles or triples or whatever the potential promise of return is, that's wonderful. I may not get rich overnight, but I'm also not going to get poor overnight. And so because you've got other strategies helping you to find those riches, whatever quote unquote rich means to an individual, wealth and feeling rich is a very elusive terms for many, because many of them don't want to put themselves in the category. They will literally tell you, I don't want to be rich. Well, do you want to be financially secure? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, that financial security to you is what somebody else calls, I want to be rich or whatever. Right. And so it's a relative term, but whatever that relative term means to individuals, it's important to know that there are different ways to get there by having a balanced approach that will not put you in a situation where you're stressed, where you're de-energized, because you might potentially see the ups and downs of how you've invested your money, and especially on the downside, nobody's enjoying that.
Yes, yeah, 100%. So we were talking about that depending on how much someone has, how much we should be diversifying. If we are just starting out, how much is required to start investing or to start working with, investment portfolios and things like that?
You're asking a very loaded question, but I'll do my best to dissect it. So in terms of percentages, if you look at the industry will say that people should put aside at least 10% of what they earn preparing for retirement. The reality is that number, that percentage increases in most cases significantly the longer people wait. Yes, if they start when they're in their 20s and they keep up with it, it may be sufficient. It may not. But if they start, my argument is if they start at 10%, and this is something that I have to tell people I didn't do myself. And when it comes to thinking backwards and thinking of what should I have done differently, that's one thing I should have done. There was plenty of money to come in, but there were also other things that we always set the money aside to spend on. And sometimes they weren't necessarily building that financial independence for us. So focusing on how you can start, whether it's 10%, whether it's 5%, start somewhere. Whether it's 20%, start wherever you feel comfortable because you can always adjust it from there. Just because you're telling yourself a percentage and you start setting the money aside and then you come into more money or you experience financial difficulties, it doesn't mean that it's set. You have the option to make changes unless you are in specific financial products. But even then, you should always have the flexibility. So that's one. The other thing that I tell individuals is when it comes to basically looking kind of long term, they need to also start thinking about, okay, how do we want that money? When do we want that money to be coming back to us, right? Because if we're just thinking about retirement and we're leaving everything else to chance, well, if we put all of the money in retirement accounts, we have to know that we may most likely, and in most cases, we're probably not going to be able to really take advantage of that money until we retire. Is that what we want? Is it truly what we want? Because what I find is that individuals start out on the path of saying, you know what, I'm setting it aside for retirement and I'm not discounting retirement at all. I think it's definitely got its place, but should part of the money be servicing me and giving me access to that money without penalties and taxes and all sorts of shackles before we reach some coveted retirement age, depending the country that you're in.
Yeah.
And oftentimes people will say, well, I didn't know that those options exist. Well, you won't know that those options exist if you just speak to the person that's managing your 401k or your retirement plan at work. And the reason for that is because they're incentivized by bringing more money into their funds, not telling you that you have different options, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing you were asking me, what's the minimum in terms of that financial advisors are looking for? I will tell you that there is no right or wrong answer there. But what you will see is that those that work for some of the largest institutions will basically tell individuals that, I'm sorry, we don't take clients unless they're over $3 million or $5 million. Or there will be individual who will say, well, I don't take any clients unless they have investable assets of a minimum of $250,000, $500,000. In my perspective, when we look at things backwards, because I always like to look at, okay, what's in it there and how do we bring it back to reality? My question is, using myself as an example again, why is it that somebody else that is in a similar situation to what my husband and I were in, where we were making a lot of money, where we were invested in real estate, where we had some retirement funds, but we weren't sitting on $500,000 or on $5 million that were quote unquote investable? Does that mean that our the money that we've worked so hard for is somehow not as valuable to someone?
Yep.
My personal argument is no. And when you hear individuals having these coveted limits, do you really want to put yourself in the bucket where you're gonna figure out a way to get to that limit of theirs? Because again, this money is money that you've worked really hard for. And you should not be put to shame because a lot of the money that you have is not is invested perhaps, but it's not invested in investable assets that those people can then invest, because that's how they make money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so the way that we're looking at it is really more based on the income that people make, not because we want to put anybody in a specific bracket, but we do that because we know the complexities that are required to get to the value that the client is looking for. And more importantly, it's that mindset. Mindset is huge. Most people have a hard time. They have an easier time dealing with somebody imposing their minimums on them than with them saying, you know what, I'll invest to bring in a team that can help me avoid the mistakes, put more money in my pocket, reduce my expenses, reduce the amount of money that is those some of those investments are costing me, and ultimately basically put more money in my pocket. And so if that mindset isn't there, then yes, the free roadmaps and the free guidance that they're getting and all of the requirements that they're being subjected to, then perhaps those are the right things for them for the time being. But what we find is that when people understand that, you know what, a lot of those individuals, their job is not to help them truly grow wealth. Their job is to take that money and invest it somewhere where management has told them. Now a new world of thinking opens up for them. And now a new level of thinking will open up for them. But unfortunately, a lot of individuals don't know that that's really what a lot of the big investment institutions even are all about. Their job is to collect assets. It's not to help the client with their specific need. It's collect assets. And then the solutions are kind of predefined.
Wow. That is, we talk a lot there about kind of things to caution on, or things to look out for, or to, areas where we should be at least educating ourselves. Is there anything else that comes to your mind now, because you've been doing this for such a long time, and there is wealth of knowledge there. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that when people are starting out, that they should look out for, whether they're working out with someone else or whatever it is? So certain things that make sure that they check and cross all their T's and dot all their I's, so at least they are feeling like they're getting in the right path.
There are many, and one that honestly I ran into last week with someone is this notion that we're gonna do what the neighbor does, we're gonna do what the colleague does, because they were able to, in our eyes, achieve something, and that looks like it. If they were able to achieve that, then the team or the people that they've used arguably should be good enough for us. And you see how many assumptions we make, even in just those couple of statements, right? It's the assumption to the assumption to the assumption, without knowing how those people did, without knowing where they started, without knowing maybe even why they ended up making a move, or how that move actually ended up turning out financially. But we make those assumptions that it's okay to just have someone, a him or a her. I have someone that's managing my money. That's one of the biggest issues that we see. And oftentimes, I would say 99.9% of the time, what we're seeing is that when an individual focuses and relies so heavily on, I've got him or her managing and taking and looking out for my money, it's very highly probable that they're leaving and they're bleeding a lot of money to many different things, whether it be fees, whether it be the types of investments they're in, maybe the type of risk that they're exposed to, just because they're trusting someone, they're looking at what their colleagues did, and they're saying, you know what, we have the mutual person a mutual contact that's managing all of our money, so we should be good, right? It's that it's either the fear of missing out or the desire to be in the same boat. It's really one and the same. But that being in the same boat doesn't always translate into optimization. It doesn't translate into I'm going to minimize my risk profile, and I'm going to be in a better situation. It just makes them feel better for the time being. And what I tell people is, you can never, this idea of either living up or keeping up. In the States, there's a saying, keeping up with the Joneses, right? And it's very universal, different names, different family names in different parts of the world. But this idea of, if they've done well, I'm going to do well, or I'm going to do what they do because then I'll end up in a really good place. How do you know? Just because they drive the nice cars or they have the nice house does not necessarily mean that when retirement comes that they're going to be able to do all the things that they wanted to do in retirement, because frankly, you don't see their bank account, nor are they going to show it to you, nor are they going to show you all of the issues and the risks and the problems that they've overcome or they've handled in the past. Oftentimes people will tell you what you need to hear because they're not going to want to be vulnerable. So if we take that vulnerability away, and if we are in turn are willing to be vulnerable, right? We set what the vulnerability that other people have and they're not projecting onto us, and we look at that and we take our vulnerability and we set it aside. Now we've got lessons learned from what they were vulnerable with, but we don't know. But at the same time, overcoming our own vulnerabilities. And my argument is that your net result, if you're in that situation, is going to be a lot better than the person you listen to. But the mindset, again, and we go back to the mindset of being willing to embrace where we're at, being willing to understand, not for you to do it all. That's the argument. One of the biggest arguments that we get from people is, but I don't want to do my own investments. You don't have to do your own investments. But if you're not empowered to understand what your options are, you will end up spending too much money on unnecessary fees and costs. You will end up overpaying in taxes, both in the current as well as probably in the future. And the likelihood that your income streams are not going to be optimized. Notice I didn't say they're not going to be there. They're not going to be optimized in retirement is huge. Because if we're able to get an additional 20 to 30% bump in retirement income, save 20 to 30 to 40% in taxes, and possibly double our wealth at least one more times during our working years, you can easily go to your numbers wherever you're at, right? And look at each one of those pillars, and the number for you, at least based on the clients that we work with, is probably going to be well over $1 million. Well over $1 million.
Wow.
Right? So it's not that we're penny pinching, but you know what? $6,000, $7,000, $20,000 of extra cost per year adds up to a lot of money in a lifetime.
Yeah.
Even if you're making a lot of money, it adds up to a lot of money. Give it to some charitable contribution. Give it to some charity, some people that really could use it, right? Don't be stingy and put it in the back of somebody that could have arguably brought down those costs to make your money work harder and grow harder. And you're okay with that just because they're doing it for you. It gets very, very emotional for me very quickly from here.
Thank you for sharing that. And I can now understand what you said there. It's so much, what you do is so much more than mindset. I love that you are touching point on that, because I think that's obviously what, for a lot of us, if not all of us, some aspect of that holds us back. And it's the information sharing, it's the mindset, it's kind of everything that we need to know to prepare for our future. It's rolled into one package. So if people do want to connect with you, if they want to get in touch with you, where can they find you, and how do you work? So obviously, I assume you work with clients one-on-one. Where can they find you?
They can find us everywhere on social media, and I'm sure you'll be including some of those links in the comments, so I won't rattle them out. But they can also find us on our website at www.empoweredfinancialplanner.com. And for your listeners today, if they want to understand some of the pitfalls that people can be, or even they should be looking to avoid, we have a quick white paper. It's a quick read on the 5 biggest financial pitfalls that everybody should be avoiding. And they can find that at www.empoweredfinancialplanner.com/pitfalls. And you will probably include that in the links as well. What I would tell folks is, once you're there, if what you're seeing, it gives you some aha moments and you want to understand more about how you could potentially be doing better, schedule a call with someone on our team, a call where we can answer some of the questions that you have. And I promise you, there's not going to be any sales. We do not ever sell to our clients. We are very selective, and not only the clients that we bring on, we want to help individuals, but we also want to make sure that there's the value is there. If the value of them, paying to work with us is not there, maybe not there quite yet because their financial situation is not maybe robust enough to where it would make sense, or if perhaps they are a good fit, we would always have that conversation and go from there. But the biggest thing, if you do schedule the call, just know that it's really focused on figuring out kind of where you're at and what are some of the things that perhaps you should be evaluating to establish your own financial freedom and independence. Again, whatever that may look like for you.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for coming on and sharing your time and all of this knowledge. It certainly gives us a lot of tools to look out for, but also a starting point. Where do we start, and then how do we actually tread that journey of investment and financial freedom? Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Vanya. I look forward to us keeping in touch and being of service to you and your listeners.
Absolutely. Thank you.